Okay, hi. Just a standard question. Is this anyone's first in-person lecture? COVID's a weird place. Okay.
After COVID or before COVID?
After COVID. Okay. Cool. So who started uni in 2020? Okay, before 2020? Okay, cool. And who's undergrad here? Hands up. And then who's postgrad? Okay, cool. Like a nice mix of people. If you're an undergrad, I assume you've had to tolerate me at some point in your life. In which case, welcome back to whatever fun we're going to have together today. And I think just a general, it's nice to see you all in person. The plan for this term is to do most of the lectures online. Generally, it's actually just you can kind of give better lectures online, frankly, because you got you kind of can't tell here, but the screen's actually scaled down. They're actually really tight resolutions on these screens, so it's kind of nicer to do an online one. But we're going to do this one in person, maybe another one in person. We'll see how we go, like maybe a week 7 one or something like that. But yeah, we're still going to have fun regardless. It is a bit of a tiring time at night. We're not going to run for 2 hours tonight. We don't really have 2 hours of stuff to talk about. And for those who are here, because you're really, really, really excited to talk about some heavy programming stuff, there's actually not a lot of heavy programming stuff tonight. There's a lot of heavy programming in the pre-recorded lectures this week. If you haven't already kind of watched those, not that you have any expectation to. If you haven't already seen this, I imagine you'd have to, because that's probably how you either discovered that you should come here tonight, or you've found the lecture link on the stream. This is our course website. Now this website's really interesting because the purpose of this course website was to actually be built with the same tools that we're going to touch on in the course, right? So the point of it was meant to be a little bit meta in the sense that by the end of the course you will be very easily able to construct this, right? It's not a very complicated website at all. You can kind of click around and you can see the timetable and you can see the course content and the lectures and the tutorials. And in fact, just to make it super meta, you can just go and actually find this on the internet, and if you wanted to, you could clone it and play around with it too, right? Pretty much none of you are going to do that because you have better things to do. But the point is that, you have the option, I guess, which probably means something. And again, we have this nice 1 hour a week situation with the lectures. So just a quick recap on that. Course, 2 hours a week. Online, live. Sometimes there'll be very long lectures. Kind of the weeks 2, 3, 4, there's a lot we cover. And in other weeks, there's a lot less, like weeks 1 and towards the end, right? We're not trying to drown you with content because there's a lot to take in the course already. But today, we will pretty much just be going through a course overview here. So I've got another laptop up here with some of the YouTube comments, which I'll try and chat to a bit. But Sylvia's again already said the resolution's kind of weird. Yes, the resolution is kind of weird. Actually, it looks super weird. It's even more than kind of weird. It's crazy weird. Oh my lord. Okay. This is again why I don't like doing these ones in person with the hybrids. So we will do most of them online. Who's here tonight because they feel like they have to be? Because it's just a course. Okay, great. Not many. That's a good sign. That's good. You're all independent thinkers. So today we're pretty much just going to run through a course overview. Essentially why are we doing this course? What's the history of web and front end and everything else like that? I'm just going to see if I can download this and get it full screen. Oh, that's not good. Does anyone know how to full screen something on a Mac? I don't use Mac very much.
If you just open it from downloads, it will open it full screen.
God darn it.
On the 3 dots on the right, there should be not that one, the one on after that. There should be the right. As far as you get.
That's not fun. That's okay. We don't really need it. I mean, most of you can read. The text is pretty big. So a quick course overview tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of web. It's going to be pretty light again. First question is, why are you doing this course? Can I just ask around, someone tell me why you're doing this course, right? So who's a friendly person? Put your hand up if you're friendly. Yep, Mr. Blue. Yep.
I want to learn front-end technologies.
Want to learn front-end technologies?
Yes.
Cool. That's.
Want to learn React.
Want to learn React?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, that's a very straightforward reason to be here. Who shares that? Who shares that desire? Want to learn front-end technologies and learn React? Cool. Okay, a few of you. My friend in the purple jumper. Yes, you. I'm so sorry, but why are you here? Not sure? That's all good. It's all good. Sometimes we stumble into things, you know? So the main reason that like many of you are probably here directly or indirectly is because, you know, when we think about software these days, the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen a massive conflation of software and the web, right? Like websites. And if you go and look out there and you go and look at what is most of the software you use, what is most of the software you build, if you're a graduate here and you end up in an industrial context, you're most likely going to be building web-based applications, right? In some way, shape, or form. And a very interesting part of web-based applications is front-end technology. Now, there's often a conversation about, you know, front-end and back-end like that, but in reality, most kind of back-end software isn't too different from the kind of programming you do day-to-day at university, right? Like the kind of stuff you learn in first year or you know, the first courses you do where you might learn a language like C or Python, most back-end technologies are just like that. You know, there's a few interesting things maybe around networking or asynchronicity, but fundamentally it's all pretty similar. Whereas front-end there's not a lot of exposure to within the curriculum, so it can be an interesting elective in that sense. And it's just an absolutely, you know, massive area. Right? Most consumer-based applications need some kind of front end. And there are interesting courses at CSE like this one, like human-computer interaction, one of the two courses, there's two of those courses, that if you are interested in products generally, this is a good place for you to be. This is a technical course, right? By trade, like nowadays I probably do a lot more product management in my day-to-day job than I do like, you know, software engineering coding necessarily. But whichever end of that spectrum you're on, it's super valuable. Basically, if you're ever hoping to build something that a human interacts with through an interface, which is probably on the web, then this is a great place to start. Put your hand up if you feel like you have some web front-end experience, even lightly. Cool. Put your hand up if you don't. Great. Don't know what everyone else is doing. That's okay. There is no assumed knowledge in this course. And it's a bit of an interesting course because, you know, sometimes students will be like, oh, this is really hard, you know. They might think it's a hard course, some people think it's an easy course, and I think what the main thing is that it's just a very different course to some of the things you might have dealt with before because who's done data structures and algorithms, right? I think all of you have to. It's kind of like the antithesis of 6080 in a way, right? You know, you have these very narrow, very hard, very technical problems that are very focused. And you're more focused on, I guess, the problem solving to an extent than the actual technology you're dealing with, right? That's what happens when you go and do something like you try and, you know, quick sort or bubble sort something. Whereas what we're dealing with here is kind of a little bit opposite. It's a big breadth topic. You know, we're going to talk about HTML, we're going to talk about CSS. They all have different kinds of versions and different points in time text been introduced, and they're massive, you know. You could read about these things for days, and then we're going to talk about JavaScript, a programming language, and we're going to learn about the fundamentals of how the web was built. Then we're going to go learn about new frameworks. And all of these things have 10, 100 things, and they all have more unanswered questions. But it's also one of the most well-resourced areas you'll ever interact with, right? Like in terms of building front end, there's so much stuff on the internet that you can go and find, get help, make sense of, good documentation, good examples. It's very rich on, you know, websites like Stack Overflow. So I think just from the outset, want to flag that it's just going to feel a little bit different in terms of the challenges. You're going to feel a lot like there's just a lot on your plate, even though you're maybe not necessarily always being intellectually challenged. And that's just kind of what front end is in the majority of cases, to be perfectly honest. You know, like when you go and do like a typical piece of work, you know, say I've done a bunch of front end work, a bunch of back end work. Your front end work will just inherently feel a little less difficult intellectually and just a little bit more difficult, you know, organizationally to get everything right. There is an inherent sense of having to be nitpicky with what we're doing, which you're probably not used to. You know, you're probably not used to playing around and thinking about pixels or getting something exactly right, or you know, you resize a browser and everything goes to hell, and you know, it will feel finicky at times, but there are benefits to that as well, right? So some of you will enjoy it more, some of you will enjoy it less. It is different, and it's all going to be valuable one way or the other. There's some stats here, such as, you know, pretty much everything's JavaScript and JavaScript frameworks these days. You go on most job sites, everyone's looking for some kind of React.js developer or something like that. In this course, we do kind of obviously talk a lot about JavaScript. There's probably going to be some interesting things in the next 5 or 10 years where we see a lot more front-end development start coming into play that isn't JavaScript. So it is a little bit moment in time, but the fundamental principles you'll learn about how, you know, web pages work essentially will carry through pretty well. And the aim is that within 10 weeks, I want to make you all confident in building your own simple web apps and to be able to build them quickly and actually use them and give them to people, right? That's the aim. We want you to come away from a course like this going like, I can do stuff. And I'm sure there's some of you in here, and again, you can raise your hands. Put your hand up if you are here because you've been sad at one point that you wanted to make something you didn't know how, right? It's like a few people. And that's kind of the feeling we want to like unwind. So we want to say, you know what, if you actually sit around one day and you're like, actually, you know what would be really cool? I'd like to make a little game, or I'd like to make a little to-do list for myself that, you know, is a little bit peculiar, a little bit how I want it to be. You can just go do that. We want you to feel empowered. That's the aim by the end of the course. So 2 important questions. What is a front-end developer, and why is web exploding? As I said, tonight's a lot about context. We're not going to use the full 2 hours. So the first question, what is a front-end developer? Well, a front-end developer is essentially someone who writes code that's executed client-side. So we talk about front-end and back-end, and most of you are going to be pretty aware of this. The distinction is simply that, you know, when you open up your phone app, you know, I have a Westpac app. I'm on Westpac. There is code that runs on the Westpac servers. That's things like checking my balance and deciding whether or not I can make a payment. And then there's code that runs on the front end, like when I click a button and a pop-up comes up. You know, what can your computer do that it can do with the internet turned off, right? If you don't, and there'll be a few of you here or online who don't have an intuitive sense of what I mean, and it's really simple. Go to a website, load it up, turn the internet off, see how far you can get. See what you can click on, right? You go to Facebook. You can click on the messages thing and pull up all the messages. You can open someone's chat. It's just not going to load all the messages, right? So that's what we're really dealing with. Front-end developers are interested in that code that's actually executed on the client side. And nowadays, everything, as we said before, is written in a web browser. There's pretty much very few front-ends that are not dealt with in a web browser, and we'll talk about that soon as well. And nearly everything we're dealing with is with 3 kind of core, simple, you know, I don't know if you call them programming languages, but they're all computer languages, which are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML and CSS being fairly straightforward, which we cover pretty much just this week, and then JavaScript, which we build on quite extensively throughout the term. And then just the fundamental reminder is that front-end developers build things for people to use. Very rarely is a front-end developer interested in a technical problem for a technical problem's sake. You know, even if they're doing some really technical things around, say, optimizations or something like that, it's nearly always for the benefit of an end user. Now, what is interesting is how we got to where we got to today. And it seems a little bit boring sometimes, but it's important to know what led to all this kind of crazy tech we have now. And if any of you had to put up with me in 1531, you know, you kind of remember that we talk about the idea of, you know, that we have computer networks, and then within that, people eventually figured out that if we join all the computers together on the internet, you know, all the computers together in the world, we get the internet, and then if we somehow get all those computers on the internet that are connected together, and we standardize a way to share documents and view documents, that's what we call the web. The web essentially being a bunch of pages that you can access through a browser that usually have a resource name that starts with HTTP. And the very earliest form of the web looks something like this, you know, 1993, kind of early to mid-90s, where people said, actually, we're going to write a language that helps us do some really basic things. Because if you imagine, like before HTML, imagine you have this ability to kind of create web pages on the internet and share them around through URLs, right? Pretty novel concept. back in the heyday, it might have just been something like a text file, where it's literally just ASCII characters. So HTML came along and said, let's add a little bit of structure to that, and gave some basics, like said, well, maybe we can have a big piece of text for a title. Maybe we can have a bold piece of text to emphasize information, or some italics, or maybe we can do some dot points here. Or maybe we can figure out how to make a particular piece of text, when you click on it, actually take you somewhere else. So HTML came about as an attempt to provide some fundamental structure to web pages. You know, it really is the skeleton of pages. And all websites to this day still kind of follow these principles to a basic degree, right? It's all text of different sizes, maybe a couple of images, dot points, boxes, very, very basic stuff. So this was the very earliest kind of form of the internet, and depending on, you know, how old or how curious you are, you probably have seen websites out there that look some kind of maybe slightly better derivative of this, right? And that's kind of where it all began. The problem was that as these became more and more popular, as websites kind of picked up and how people use the web got a lot more involved, people wanted better than black and white, right? You wanted something a bit more dynamic and interesting. So as you kind of approached towards the end of the 90s, two big things came about, which was the introduction of CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets, style being the key word there, as well as JavaScript. JavaScript being a language that has nothing to do with Java, and don't read into the name at all. But essentially, CSS was introduced to try and make pages look nicer, you know? So it was kind of this language developed to allow you to do things like change the size of things, or change the color of things, or change the positioning of things, and actually like make a page look how you want. So HTML was there to structure a page how you wanted, and CSS was there to make it look how you wanted. It was really, you know, the paintbrush to the house, if you want to think about it like that. And then JavaScript was actually like a more classic programming language. If you haven't interacted with JavaScript before, it's a lot like Python. If you haven't interacted with either of those before, it's a lot like C, depending on how you think about it, right? They're all just programming languages. They have if statements, they have while loops, you know, they have variables, they have functions. It's all the same. JavaScript existed though to start adding a level of like dynamicness to pages. And the earliest forms of dynamicness on pages might have been clicking a button and having a modal pop up. You know, and even to this day, that's nearly still used, like, you know, powered through JavaScript. So if you've gone to a website and you click like, you know, close account, and after you click close account, it gives you a pop-up, something appears that wasn't there before and it says, are you sure? That's pretty much JavaScript at play, creating a little bit of dynamism on the website. Because without JavaScript, websites can be structured and look pretty like this, but they typically won't do anything. They just kind of look a certain way. Maybe they can do a couple of interesting things like, you know, glow or something, but you can't interact with them in any really fancy way. It's you know, the easiest way to picture a website without JavaScript is pretty much just to like go to Wikipedia, right? Because Wikipedia is really a really straightforward example of a website that's just HTML with a bit of light CSS, random article. Cool. I don't even know how to pronounce that. Poland. Oh, sorry. I was like, what country? That looks a little bit like Central Europe. So, you know, you look at this page, it's like, what is it doing? Got some text, got some colors, got some boxes, got some links, got some images. Like, okay, cool. This is what you should picture when you think of what a website looks like. HTML, bit of CSS, no JavaScript. There's nothing that happens here, is there? You know? You're not clicking on anything and it's not causing anything. There's no cool animations. There's a lot of other sites like that. You know, if you go to UNSW, it's like, okay, well, not a lot's happening here. Okay, that guy's head gets bigger. Oh my God. Everyone's so happy. Are you all this happy? You know, like this is a pretty straightforward page. There's not a lot of like, you know, but see this, right? So now we're starting to see like some, you know, very basic things you might use JavaScript for here. It's changing the page. The second it stops feeling static and it starts feeling something else, there's a good chance it's JavaScript. But a lot of this other stuff doesn't really matter. You know, when I click the search, see how that like changed there? That'd be some JavaScript, probably. And when I search stuff, you know, it all gets a bit complicated after that. But understanding that kind of fairly simple trio of technology is really, really helpful. And that took the web a long way, right? Like I was born in 1993 and like, this is like, I'm a little bit early for this. But like you kind of go further and you get into this area and it's like, okay, this, and nearly all of you here will remember a younger internet from when you were very young, right? Where it was just kind of colorful pages that didn't do a lot and had some information on it. Maybe some cool things like some games that used Flash or something. But where things really started to kind of go crazy was somewhere in the early 2000s. I kind of don't remember this until maybe like 2007 or 2008, and it was the introduction of Ajax. And Ajax was a particular usage of JavaScript based on what web browsers could do at the time, where it let you actually make network requests quietly in the background. This is really interesting because before this point, all the web really was a fairly straightforward life cycle of here's a URL. I'm going to like send that URL to my computer, which sends it to the router, which sends it to all the ISPs, and then it gets to a server somewhere, and that server gives me back literally a web page, and that comes back to me, and I look at that web page. You know, maybe there's some JavaScript on that web page that lets me do some cool things like this. But if I want more information, I have to go get another web page. And again, this is kind of classic Wikipedia stuff. Work, buddy. Yep, got it, nailed it. This is like classic Wikipedia stuff where if you, every time you click on a link, you'll see that little loady thing up here. Every single time I do that, it's like a new URL that's getting sent to a server. That server's giving me back a resource, and I'm rendering that resource in my browser. So the introduction of Ajax in the 2000s was a piece of tech that said, you know what? I'm actually going to allow myself to make network requests, and you don't have to reload that whole page. You don't have to go and like refresh the whole thing. And that's where we started to get some of the earliest and more interesting websites. Now, my first memory of this, honestly, was Facebook chat, right? I don't know what yours was, but I remember like messaging on Facebook chat and finding it so weird that there was like interactions happening that clearly involved the internet that wasn't causing my page to refresh, right? Because you kind of remember, like, imagine like being on like maybe a really, really early version of an email. And I don't know how much I'm testing your age here. I don't think I am, but maybe a few more years it might be hard. But it's like, you go to your like early versions email, you were like refreshing all the time. And if it wasn't email, it was something else, right? And even today, there's a bunch of shitty websites out there that you have to do this with, right? So you're all familiar with it. But Ajax is what powered that. It was asynchronous JavaScript playing in the background. And then things started to get really interesting. Because, you know, whereas, you know, you might have had dedicated, you know, what are some pre-Facebook ways people used to chat? Someone tell me. Sorry? MSN. Yeah, cool. So it's like, you got MSN. MSN was like a native application that, I don't know what it was built in, maybe like Java, C++ or something. Things like that.
There was a Blackberry phase.
A Blackberry.
Yes, there was like a Blackberry phone, and people used to be like, it was like a whole system, like the way we have it with iPhones, the blue and the green bubble.
Yep.
It was sort of that. I never used it. I was very small, but
Yeah, exactly.
I've seen that in movies.
Some Blackberry software. Yep.
Go far back, pen, paper, and stamps.
Pen, paper, and stamps. Yeah, that's stretching it. Yep.
ICQ.
ICQ. Yes. Yeah, I remember people talking about it a lot. That's my memory of that one. Yep, up the back. MySpace? Yeah. MySpace was interesting because it was like, that was like right at the edge of where web started to pick up a bit, right? And, you know, I remember sending messages on MySpace. I didn't want to say it, but like MySpace was my first memory of like refreshing a web page waiting for someone to message me back. You know? Being like, you know, when are they going to reply? Because if I don't refresh, they might have emailed me and I don't know. And I'll just do one more. Someone else put their hand up. Email. Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, email. So, and you know, you think about things like Outlook and whatnot, and the key thing here is that a lot of those applications like MSN, they were all built for the computer. They were not part of a web browser. You weren't using these things in Chrome or Firefox or Safari or anything like that. But when Ajax started to pick up, it was so interesting because you could kind of meet feature parity, maybe not performance parity, but certainly feature parity through the web browser. And this really is what began the slow transition of the power to the web, right? This is what began this like 15-year story of how now more and more and more you are doing more things through the web browser because we could start sending JavaScript asynchronously. And you know, we're going to be doing stuff like this in the course. What then got slightly more interesting is I'd call this the industrialization of the web a little bit. So you kind of have, you know, the early 2000s and up to maybe 2010, and there was all this cool tech, and you were building like cooler and cooler websites. But honestly, most large companies weren't doing anything massive. I think Facebook really was one of the absolute like first big like heavy tech web company, right? Now obviously like Google's massive, but Google at the end of the day were like a search engine. It was like really server side, It wasn't like a ton going on. You were searching and getting some results. But there were two pieces of technology that really amplified these, which was Node.js. And Node.js was essentially someone came along and said, hey, we're writing all this JavaScript which runs in a web browser. Why don't we use that exact same language, but we'll build an interpreter for it for the command line? So if any of you, like who's written Python before? Most of you, right? And if you haven't interacted with JavaScript, Node.js was someone saying, let's go and make an interpreter so we can use, just like we write Python and we run it on the terminal, let's do that with JavaScript and run it on the terminal. And this was really interesting and exciting because this is when companies started to really pick it up a bit too. And the language, because there's like this cyclic effect, right? Like who do you think drives forward all the developments in web, right? It's Google and Airbnb and like Microsoft, right? They're behind it all because they've got so much tech there, and they're a mix of like good people and greedy people, so they keep putting money there, and then that sends that along further, and all the nerds go there, right? And then the nerds get really excited, and then they go and build some more stuff. So it's all kind of this like big ball rolling down a hill that's just getting bigger and bigger. And Node.js was interesting because for the first time, pretty much ever, someone could actually go and write a web server on the server side and write a front end in the exact same programming language. And that got people excited because if you're building a big team, if you're trying to run a software engineering project, that's one language. There's a lot of benefits to that. In terms of skill, in terms of training, you can reuse code easier. You don't have to get into all this kind of crazy world about bindings. Like there'd definitely be a lot of applications out there where they build a server with an API in C++ and then a front end in JavaScript, and it can all be kind of a nightmare. So the second thing that really picked things up was TypeScript. And TypeScript was, I guess it's like people, again, a lot of it kind of came industrially, which is that you build a big enough application in a language like Python, which doesn't have types, or JavaScript, and at some point you start to have anxiety attacks, At some point you're like, wow, this software is really brittle. And I don't have as many static assurances as I'm used to with maybe a strongly typed language like C, C++, Java, C# or something. So TypeScript was developed as a superset language, and we don't cover it in this course just because this course is already quite dense, but it's really easy to teach yourself later, so this is just context. But it said, hey, we can actually create some front end, but with the security, in the sense of not like, cybersecurity, but in the sense of like peace of mind of a typed language. So more and more industrial. And TypeScript was really where we started to see the big companies pick it up. You go and look at all these startups out there nowadays. Atlassian, Canva, like two really obvious ones that are quite, prolific within the Sydney sphere. It's like a lot of what they do is TypeScript now. And it wouldn't have been 10 years. They wouldn't, it wouldn't have been as heavy on the JavaScript necessarily 10 years ago because it just is a bit dangerous sometimes to use that, and maybe the technology didn't exist. So industrialization of web technologies happened here. And then as we're getting, further into this story, another interesting development was the beginning of hybrid apps and Electron apps, right? And this has been a common theme for a long time. When you built an application historically, you had to build like a Windows version of it, a Mac version of it, a Linux version of it if you really gave a damn. And this is the case for like Google Chrome, right? There is like a team that there's like a Google Chrome for Mac and there's like a Google Chrome for Windows. It's not like necessarily the exact same code base because they're both very different systems, and if you're building these native applications, you have to understand the different operating systems and their subtleties, and that's taxing. It costs time and money. The same thing kind of happened for a long time with iOS and Android, and in that brief stint with the Windows Phone, if anyone remembers that. And this still happens today. You have like iOS app teams and Android teams, and that friction is really the impetus for what drove someone sitting down and saying, hey, what would be really, who's like familiar with virtual machines, right? Anyone ever played with a virtual machine? You like run Windows within Windows? Same kind of concept. You can run Windows on Mac, you can run Windows on Windows, you can run it on Linux because someone's gone and said, I'm going to create this like little virtual interface layer and then I can run a thing anywhere because the interface was defined everywhere. The same thing happens with Java. If anyone paid attention when they did 2511, if you're an undergrad, you remember they talk about like the Java runtime engine. It's essentially a virtual layer that sits above it so that your code has like a standard of, like an int is always the same size on every computer because someone just said, oh, I'm going to sit down and do the effort to get everything standard. Great. Massive things happening in the web space with this too. I've got pictures up here of Discord and Slack. MS Teams is another one. Most of you all of you should have absolutely used one of Teams, Slack, or Discord by this point in your life, right? And they're interesting because, and a bunch of you would know this, but it's like they are web apps. You download Slack and install Slack or Discord, and it feels very native most of the time. VS Code's another example. These are all websites. They are just wrapped in a nice little bucket, and then they're given like a little header bar with, your little dots that say, red and green or something. And then they're packaged up. So essentially someone said, well, we've already got Google Chrome for Windows and Mac. So why don't we just build Slack in the, on the internet as a web browser? And then we'll put it in like a fake web browser as like a separate application. Because, web browsers are annoying with tabs, right? Sometimes it's nice to have a thing down here, isn't it? I like that. I hate using things like, I don't like I'm not going to give an example, but this was massive because suddenly you had these apps now, you think about Ajax helped them actually do the cool things that native apps could do. You think about the industrialization of things with Node and Typescript that made big companies say this is a real technology that we can do at scale. And then when you got these hybrid app things, they said, you know what, let's just build MS Teams as a website. One code base, one repo. We can run it on a web browser. We can run it through our I don't know whether they use Electron or some other software on Windows and Mac. Super simple. And the exact same thing's happening in the mobile world, which we don't touch on much in this course. But you see that a lot now. A lot of companies won't be building separate mobile apps. They'll be using some kind of standard, I don't want to use the word virtualized because it's a bit loaded, but some way to just then deploy it to many, many places. And then somewhat tangentially, this isn't really like a logical sequence, we had the introduction of declarative frameworks. And this kind of happened, I'd say in line with this over the last 8 years. And you'll learn this in the course as you do it, but coding in normal JavaScript is sometimes like putting a drill through your forehead. The language was never designed to grow. And it's very fun to pick on JavaScript, isn't it? How many of you yourself or have a friend that has complained about JavaScript at some point, right? You ever got a friend that's like, I hate JavaScript, it's such a bad language. And you're like, cool. It is a bad language, and there's a quote that I love. I can't remember who said it, but it's that whole idea of there's only two types of languages out there. There's the languages that people use, there's the languages that people complain about, and then there's the languages that people don't use, And generally, the languages that people use, they use it, and then the language just kind of rockets out of control, and everyone uses it much quicker than anyone intended to maintain it, right? I'm sure you have, I don't know what an analogy of this is, but I'm sure if you built something, like a little started, I have a friend who sews stuff. They make little dog collars, right? And it's okay, so they sew dog collars, and then everyone starts buying them, and then they're kind of rushing to get them out, and they don't have time to really think about scale or how this works, and it was never designed for scale. It was just a fun little project, right? And then it just gets out of control. So JavaScript is like many languages like that. C++ is a bit similar, where it just kind of got out of control. And that made building websites kind of a bit of an awful experience sometimes. It was never really designed to be used that much, at all. Imagine trying to program a website in C, right? Not that that's the same thing, but you'd be like, geez, that's not going to be fun. So the introduction of declarative frameworks were really interesting, and I think React would have been one of the early ones, Angular. Sorry, Angular was one of the earliest ones that was ever created. And Angular was so interesting because I can't explain it to you if you haven't used it, so we'll just kind of defer this till you've played with it towards the end of the course. But these frameworks were a way where big companies took a step back and they said, what's an actual really logical way that I actually like to program when it comes to building web applications in the modern era? Let's think about it from scratch. It's not a different language or technology. It's kind of and we will chat about it, but these declarative frameworks like React are these kinds of pseudo JavaScript languages that kind of you port themselves into JavaScript automatically. So it feels like JavaScript, but it also feels different but it is far more natural and far more capable as well. And that's what we kind of chat about towards the end of the course. So this course in a nutshell is HTML and CSS a little bit at the start. Then we get into JavaScript for a couple weeks. Then we get into some of the harder parts of JavaScript, which are particularly around asynchronicity, which is a big part of event-driven programming like JavaScript. And then the last kind of third, maybe 40% of the course, we go into like, all right, now that we've done kind of old school stuff, let's go deep and have a look at what these new frameworks like React are like. And we go and play around with those. So I've said this before, don't need to say it again. Nearly everything is web JavaScript based these days. Most stuff, I mean, this web page, like these websites I'm looking at, Slack, was using Discord, I was using MS Teams today, Outlook, that was through a web browser, just like everything, it's crazy, it's everywhere. So getting a little bit more into the course then, because that was the fun part, this course doesn't have a lot of assumed knowledge. It kind of assumes three really basic things. It assumes that you have an understanding of Git. Now, this is a hybrid course of undergrad, postgrad. If you're an undergrad, you have this assumed knowledge unless you have like a really, 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 really bad memory, right? So you're okay. If you're a postgrad, it's a bit trickier. The Git knowledge we require you to know in this course is really light. Like it's quite light. It's you don't even really need to know it. You can kind of just run a few commands and pop into a help session. But we did create like a lab, like a take-home lab you can do in your own time. Here, that link needs to be updated, where you can actually teach yourself the basics a bit. That link is wrong. I'll go fix that tonight. And you also need to have a basic understanding of high-level scripting languages, which again, I think all of you have done, because I think by this point most postgrads also, do postgrads need to have done Python by now? Yeah, great, okay, cool. Like, if you know Python, JavaScript, you can learn really, really quickly. Like, you'll pick it up in a flash. They're not, like, the syntax is different, but the gist of it's the same. You know, it's like, oh, okay, great, variables, I don't have to define them. I've got arrays and objects. It's all kind of the same. So you don't really need a lot coming in. And we say the basics of HTTP and web browsers. And all we really mean by that is, you know, if you've ever seen an API before, or you've seen like a GET or POST request or something like that, then that's more than enough information to get you going as well. And we kind of touch on that anyway. But otherwise, you know, it's a pretty straightforward course in terms of assumed knowledge. There are 6 real key things that we want to touch on in the course and get to. We want you to get really, really comfortable with JavaScript as a language. So there's like a lot of, it's hard to explain. It's like, it's not like we're going to spend 10 weeks talking about, if statements and while loops, right? You're all big people now. You can figure that out yourselves. But we'll be talking about all the ways that you can use JavaScript. Like how do we use JavaScript to build forms and manage events like click events? And how do we use JavaScript to store data in the web browser? How do we use JavaScript to send network requests? So it's a lot of like applied JavaScript. We're going to be learning a bit about how you can write tests with JavaScript, do a bit of debugging. It is a very light touch course where we cover a lot of a little. Yep. We also want to look at HTML, CSS, DOM to construct web pages. So there's non-dynamic web pages that I mentioned, where things just kind of look pretty, but they don't act a certain way. That's another big part of the course, and it's actually what your first assignment is on. Your first assignment doesn't have much JavaScript in it at all, which can be nice and very fun and easy. We're going to look at modern JavaScript and CSS frameworks. So there was kind of this philosophical toss-up when I was trying to get this course going a couple of years ago, which was, should we, because there's not enough time, right? It'd be nice if we had more time, but we don't have more time, and there's better things for the school to worry about than creating a 6080 version 2 kind of thing afterwards. But we were like, well, what if we just teach old school JavaScript the whole course, That's really cool because it would teach you the fundamentals of how the web works, and arguably that's why you're here at university, right? You could go do some Code Academy thing on React if you really want to. Like, this should be about science, and ideas and philosophies and stuff. But, you're here for the good stuff. You're here because you want to do stuff, right? Like, I get that. We get that. You know, you want to do some React so you can finish this course and go and build some stuff and be like, I'm so cool, right? Some of you feel that way. Others are just like, I want to be smart. So we couldn't just do that kind of old school JavaScript, but at the same time, we thought if we just do all this React stuff, we're basically just going to be like a weirdo, expensive version of one of those online courses you can do for cheaper, and you're not going to have any idea what's happening. And in fact, like I've seen this. I was part of this like educational course where they actually had a massive interest from companies like Canva and Atlassian who had hired people who'd gone and taught themselves front end on like General Assembly, you know, and they came in and they worked at these companies as a front end developer, and then them and the company kind of realized that they lacked a more fundamental knowledge of computer science, right? Because like 3 months of learning React, you can go and build stuff, but a lot of the time you don't necessarily know why it works or can make sense of the more complicated problems. Now, granted, you've all solved that problem because you've been doing these university degrees, but we like to teach this fundamental JavaScript so you actually know what's happening. Right? We don't want you to just be, what's the word, like not occupational, vocational, right? This is not a vocational course where we just say, here's React, you don't need to worry about it. It's like my dad's an electrician, right? He knows everything about plugs and PowerPoints, but I start talking to him about the physics of electricity and we get into arguments because, you know, he's got an understanding of it. He doesn't have the internet, so he's not going to hear me complaining about him. But it's like, you know, we'll be arguing about how electricity works and like what voltages are and stuff, and you can tell that he's just like got a vocational understanding of things. And that mix is super, super important, right? You don't just want this like nice theoretical knowledge because you'll be completely useless. You don't just want a complete vocational knowledge because eventually someone else will catch up with you. Asynchronicity, I said, is a huge part of this. If all you've really programmed from this point is like C and Python, or I mean most languages, frankly, you probably haven't dealt a lot with asynchronicity in the sense that even if you've done OOP before, most of your code still has a general tendency to kind of start and stop at some point. It doesn't really kind of just exist waiting for like actions to happen. Maybe a little bit in a Java course some of you might have done, but that's going to be a bit of a heady thing, and it's probably the hardest part of the course, I think. Not because it's like technically impossible, but it just it's probably some of the newest concepts to people. This one here, basic knowledge of front-end security. This one probably shouldn't even be here. We really don't touch on a lot of that. There's a web security course out there, and there's already too many courses in CSE that try and do everything, you know. They're like, this is important, so I should talk about it. And it's like, no, you can let someone else talk about it. So there'll just be some implicit things there, but don't lean on that too heavily. And then we're also going to do a little bit of an awareness of good UI, UX design and accessibility. Now, if you're interested in UI, UX and accessibility, you should go and study a course like COMP3511 or COMP4511. I'm not sure if there's a postgrad equivalent. I don't know the codes off the top of my head. But they're human-computer interaction courses, and they go well deep into things like, you know, what is a good page, like not even worrying about technology. But we do cover a little bit, particularly just on like what are the basics, what are some top tips for how to make something look good. And a lot of those we have some guest lectures from Canva. So this is a challenging level 6 course. Now, I'm not trying to scare you because I don't think it's that challenging, but the reason I have this here is because, you know, we teach you what's important, and then at the end of every course, there's usually a handful of students that email me and they're like, this course is too hard. And I'm like, okay, well maybe it was the wrong choice for you then, you know? And it's like, it's not the most challenging course. Like I've seen a lot of courses in CSE. I'd say that intellectually this course is a 6 to 7 out of 10 on the hard spectrum, where 10's like pain and 1's like, you know, no effort at all. But the hard part, and again, thanks for putting up with my interludes. I ramble much more in person, I'm learning tonight. But here's the problem, and this is existential. With front end, you can just keep sinking time into it. And I think a big part of this is because it's so obvious to you if you've gotten something wrong. And it's really quite funny. It's like, you go do a maths exam. I talk a lot about that if you go do like a maths exam, there's a distinction between you finishing the exam and you getting it all correct, right? You've walked out of the exam, you're like, I'm done. But you didn't get 100%. Like, why'd you walk out? It's because you thought you did a good job, maybe, right? Like, oh, I got some stuff wrong. The tricky part with front end, I think, is that you know every single minute you're doing stuff that you're getting it wrong. You can see it. It doesn't work. Like, and this is I think, like, and just keep this in your mind because otherwise you will go loopy at some point. It kind of teases you into never stopping because you can see it in front of you. You can see the marks you're not getting. You don't have that kind of ability to just be like, I'm pretty sure I'm great, and someone else will figure it out later. Like, you know before you submit it. And I tell students this all the time. It's like, you kind of know what mark you're going to get often because it's just like so obvious. If you actually, like, if you finish everything perfectly, you've probably gotten 100%. And then you get caught up in these tricky conversations about, like, why are we creating assessments that are impossible to finish? And it's like, well, it's not really. Like, every assessment you could argue is impossible, well, is ideally designed so that not everyone completely nails it, right? But there's different challenges. In, like, an algorithms course, you're probably going to get an edge case in an algorithm wrong. In a course like this, because it's a breadth topic, you're going to have to get 1,000 little things right. And at some point, this is just what I'd encourage you all to, at some point, you're just going to have to stop and be like, I can't do everything, you know? And if you don't do that, you're kind of going to finish this course thinking that it burrowed your brain out, you know, and that it was the most difficult thing you ever dealt with. Because it's tempting, because it's right there and you can see it. So just keep that in mind. I don't think it's the most challenging course, but if you let yourself get compulsive, you know, and you let yourself, like, just be too aware of what you're not doing, then you'll sometimes work a bit harder. And it's okay to give up. We all have other things to do, right? Do you have other things to do? I have other things to do. I make mistakes all the time. Sometimes I forget to do something, or, you know, maybe there's like a typo in my lecture slides sometimes because I'm tired and I'm not getting enough sleep. Okay, I might make a few typos and not waste an extra hour proofreading it 3 times. It's like, same thing for you. Like, don't ever just murder yourself for trying to get absolutely everything perfect, unless you have the time and the inclination. But most of you don't. Most of you live very complex lives, probably. You got some shit going on right now, I'm sure. Some of you got some heavy stuff going on right now, I'm sure. So don't put too much pressure on yourselves. And you're at the end of your degree, probably. So who's like at the end of their degree? Who's like their last 3 terms? 3 or less terms to go. Okay, you're not at the end of your degree. Keep working hard. Okay. Course site, we've talked about the course site. Sweet, done. We have a team of people here. We've got like 13 tutors. We have a lot of help sessions in this course. On like a per student basis, I think I've managed to get the most help sessions per student of any level 6 course, which is exciting. So you have tons and tons of help sessions throughout the term. They're basically structured to be like weighted on, and you can see them on the site. The number of people there is indicative of how much we think your time you're going to need. Like how much of your time you're going to suck from us on a given help session. So, you know, you'll see like around assessments being due, and assessments due like at like 10 a.m. on Monday. I might actually give you guys till the evening on Monday. Feeling generous. I got to change that. I released the assignment tonight, and I think it said 10 a.m. Monday, but I might make that 10 p.m. But you know, so these are structured this way, and the only point there is that if you go to a help session where there's one person, there's going to be one person. That's not going to change that evening. Go to a help session with something to do. The worst thing you can do is turn up to a help session with that mentality of like, I've got a problem, I can't do shit until I finish this problem, and then you're just going to sit there fuming for 70 minutes while you sit in a queue on a bad night, right? So like always go to these things and get the help, but like just be aware sometimes it takes time. That's just for your benefit. The team's really helpful on the help sessions. The team's also really helpful with tutorials. Yes?
As one of the tutors with just by myself, please come to me with a list of questions instead of just popping up and saying, I don't know, I hope that I was to encounter a problem while waiting for you, okay, which has happened before.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's like when it comes to asking questions, and many of you know this too, if you ask a bad question, you'll kind of waste everyone's time, including yourselves. You know, I think because I work with engineers and students and everything all the time, and it's kind of like you should always be able to figure out like where your problem is, generally. Why it happens or necessarily what's going wrong is like fair to ask for help. So the worst things I ever see are when someone's like, you know, they're like, hey, I'm trying to run my website, but it's just not loading. It's like, what do you mean? Like, what did you do? What URL did you go to? How do you know it's not loading? Did it give you an error? Is it blank? You know, like, what have you tried to fix it? Like, if you can narrow that down, it makes it a lot easier for us to help you. So definitely get into that. In terms of the course and the team, it's really simple. Lectures, tutes, assignments. That's it. We've talked about lectures, 2 hours-ish with me a week, 2 hours with pre-recorded. If you're unlucky, you have to deal with me in the pre-records as well. Just reading the YouTube chat. It says the stream died. It's very sad. I hate these hybrid things. Everything always breaks. The tutorials are interesting because what we did last term, and you have the benefit of this, and last term was quite a heavy slog, is that what we did, so last term I wanted to give you all more support, like more resources to teach yourself stuff. So last term we went and said, you know what, instead of creating 1 hour of tutorial questions a week, let's create 3 hours of tutorial questions a week. And then what we did was we broke them up into different tutorials and we gave them to different tutors, and different tutorials had different streams, and we recorded a whole bunch of tutorial questions, right? More choice. There's stuff you care about, stuff you don't care about. And then what we did was for each tutorial question like this, we snipped it up and we recorded a video of a tutor going through it. So this is really exciting for you because what it means is that you kind of don't even need to turn up to tutorials. The entire list of tutorials, the questions, the solutions, and a tutor going through these solutions is like all sitting up there on the website right now for you, right? You're all adults, you can work through stuff in your own time, so you're very empowered to do that. However, we know sometimes you just like turning up to tutes and listening to someone talk at you. It's very soothing, right? So what tutors have basically been told is that, you know, when they run tutorials, and there's a whole bunch of them, and you can go to any tutorial you want, I don't care what one you're enrolled in, right? Most people aren't going to go to tutes in person, so if you have a time you want to go to, just go to that. Don't worry about what's on the timetable. You can ask them to go through some certain questions, or they might want to go through some certain questions. And it's meant to be quite free-flowing. You know, so don't kind of go in being like they're going to have a 4-part lesson plan, because it's like every week, and all the topics are here, you know, we have them where like you can actually go and, I can't remember, yeah, by topic, you can go and say, I want to learn more about HTML, CSS, you know, the CSS part of HTML, CSS, and there's a whole bunch of questions here. And you can just go and look at them, a bunch of replicating designs, lots of different designs. It shows you like kind of how hard they are, whether they're like recommended you do them, like this is for the fundamentals, or whether it's like, well, this will help you refine your knowledge. And then there's some extended ones, which is like for the people that have nothing better to do, right? It's like, it's all just meant to be there. There's a lot of time put into this in T1 to try and make it seem like it makes sense for students like yourselves. So hopefully that makes that learning experience very straightforward. And the tutors will just be there to support you throughout the term. Yeah. That's a bunch of I linked the wrong lecture notes tonight. I have like another deck, but I linked it wrong on my way here. Yes?
What is the sign cost and industry column?
That's a good question. I actually just noticed that whilst I was talking. That was what we used to do last term to kind of instruct to students which ones to go to. So basically last term, these were all new questions, so we were like, if you actually want to go to, like, if you want to see this question gone through, before we had the recordings, it was like, go to a tutor who's doing that one this week. So that'll probably just remove. I forgot that was there because it was really relevant last term. So none of you need to worry about it, because tutors will just kind of do what they want, or what questions are interesting to them, or what questions you'd like them to do. So super open-ended there. Easy. Bunch of people at Canva. We used to have some help from people at Atlassian and Google. We kind of slowly, I don't want to say like got rid of some lectures, but there was certainly a handful of lectures which didn't really work too well in a university context, so we've kind of been re-recording some of them. But most of the ones that are left are from a few key people from Canva. In particular, Anna does some great lectures, and Nick does some great lectures, and then Tom. There's a few others, of course, but definitely Anna and Nick and Tom. And Anna and Tom are CSE graduates. I can't remember about Nick. I feel like it might be, but I could be wrong. So, you know, really lovely people who've given up time and, you know, they work day to day in industry like this being engineers, so that's super exciting. In terms of assessments, we have 3 assessments in the course, 3 programming assessments, assignment 1, 2, and 3. They are due in weeks 4, 7, and 10 on a Monday. And the one in week 10, we might actually make it due a bit later in the week. It's a little bit tricky with the third assignment because if we make it due too late, we don't have time for your tutors to mark it. Another thing about the assessments, UNSW has mandated a new late penalty, which says that if you have a late penalty, you have to do 5% off a day, and that's it, right? Up to 5 days, I think it is. Here's the tricky thing about that. A lot of the assessments we have, like, so what we used to do is we used to be like, okay, this assessment's due on a Monday because we need to start marking it on like a Tuesday, and we'd have like a 24-hour period with a really aggressive late penalty, right? It's basically like, don't submit it late, but if you do, you can. It's just like, it's quite penal. The problem with the 5% stuff is that what happens is that we can't just make something due on a Monday and let people submit it with a low penalty all the way till Friday or like Saturday, because a lot of people will just do it and then that drags out our marking. So the only way we could actually get around that is if, say, we needed the assessment on a Tuesday, right? So normally it's, say, due Monday week 4 because we need it on the Tuesday night. We would have to like reverse engineer that and actually make it due on like the Friday beforehand. Do you know what I mean? And then put the 5% so that it all kind of finishes at the right time. So I'm just basically prefacing that I'm pretty sure in the assessments I'm basically going to say there is no late penalty. We're just going to remove the late penalty and make it due on the Monday night or something like that. So there won't be a late penalty. Obviously, if you submit it like a minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes late, I'm not like a douchebag, right? Like, you'll be fine. But like, I know it's really hard because you can't help submitting stuff late sometimes, can you? We've all been there. No matter how much you know that there's a deadline, no matter how much you know that train is going to leave Hurstville at like 9:28, and you've known that for days, you will still get there late, you know? So it's a little bit tricky, but that's the approach I'm probably going to take because the alternative is to make it due earlier, is the point. So, you know, work with me on that. If a bunch of you end up submitting it late, we'll have to make it due earlier just to, you know, keep the lights moving. But they'll be due in weeks 4, 7, and 10. Assignments 2 and 3 are quite large. They're big JavaScript assignments. So assignment 2 is like a big classic JavaScript assignment. Assignment 3 is like a big React assignment. And assignment 1 is like a little HTML, CSS assignment that's meant to be pretty light and friendly and get you going. Assignment 1's really easy. There's a note at the bottom here which says start assignment 2 early. Now, telling anyone that you need to start something early is usually a bit of a lost cause, but hear me out. Assignment 1 is due at the start of week 4. We're going to talk about it before we wrap up tonight. It is not going to take you 3 weeks to do it. It's just not. We just make it due because, like, why not? You know, like, we'll give you the time if we have it. Assignment 2 is a big assignment. We'll probably release it next week. You can probably start that assignment at the start of week 3. And I'll keep reminding you of this, but the point is that you should start assignment 2 before assignment 1 is due. Now, I could here make assignment 1 due on the Monday of week 3 just to like very directly remind you that you should move on with your life. But again, I'm hoping I can trust you all as adults to be like, assignment 1 is not due yet. Hopefully you finished it. You should really start, but we've given you that extra window just because we know shit happens to some of you, right? And you need that extra time. So start assignment 2 early and you'll get a lot of reminders with that. We do have an exam. It's an at-home, online, prac exam. It's a bit like a speed run. My take on this is that I never liked closed book exams because like no one in the real world has to solve problems without the internet anymore. But I do think there's an argument that's quite interesting for like time pressure exams, particularly if they're small weighted, because like if any of you have worked, again, in an industrial context, there are times when sometimes you have to work quickly too. You know, it's actually a skill to be able to like move quickly and solve problems quickly and not just take like, you know, 3 days and need a few naps and stuff to do it. But it's a little percentage of the course. So we have this kind of thing at the end, which, and don't picture yourself like panic rushing or anything like that. That's not the point of the exam. The exam's more like, We want to put problems to you and have you solve them within a few hours rather than a few days or a few weeks. So that's what that 20% exam is. It's a really small exam. It's very, very tiny. Okay, I've talked about this a fair bit. Again, these are the old decks. The stupid link didn't work. I'll fix it up tonight. We've talked about help sessions. We've talked about assignments. Most things in this course are run on Ed. If you haven't seen it already, you can click on the forum in the sidebar. It will take you to our forum. You've got a notice here and a welcome. Thank you everyone for introducing themselves. There's also cute pictures like Adrian's dog and these mice. Flowers, cat. No, it's cute. Less cute cat. I'm kidding. Sorry. Cat's good. Little creatures. Lots of fun stuff. Pizza. Pizza? Waffles? Pizza. Fat pizza. Yeah, rocket, ball, dog, game, lifeboat.
Who needs AI image recognition when you have paper?
Yes. Cool. So yeah, go say hi there. We will do notices here. I tried doing this last term. Some people didn't like it because you don't, like when you get a notice, it doesn't tell you in your email. You have to click on the link and like go read the notice on Ed. It's a little bit annoying, but there's some benefits. Like I can schedule notices, I can edit notices without having to send you another email. Also, it's like one less platform you have to worry about throughout the term. You're just like on one platform. So thank you for your patience there. But if you do have any questions throughout the course, go to Ed first, post your question. If you can't get it sorted through Ed, then simply go to help sessions is the next place to go. And then if you can't get help, you can always email me. You can email me anytime, cs6080@csc.unsw.edu.au. I will get those emails and I'm more than happy to help. There are going to be some weird teething issues this week with Gitlab. Some of you might have already experienced it where you're having trouble logging into Gitlab. If you are experiencing that, and there won't be many of you, we will solve that within the next day or two. Don't stress, we will get to it very easily. Okay. We're getting near the end. In terms of getting set up with this course, thankfully it's one of the easiest courses to get set up for, and in fact we encourage you not to use VLab and stuff because it's one of the easiest courses to use locally. In fact, pretty much everything we do just requires Git, a web browser, and it's actually kind of and Node.js. Right? A few like basic tools that are very, very standard on computers. There's a guide we have on the Eccles website called Installation here on the sidebar, more help, called Installation. You can go and read this. It's saying what you need to do to get set up for the course is you need a web browser and editor, you need to install Node.js, which includes NPM, and oh my god, that's everything. Wow, we're nearly done. Like that's Yarn, a few other things, but it's all kind of tiny. It's very straightforward. You can go and spend 10 minutes doing that. Most of this is already set up on VLab. CSE have been doing some massive infrastructure changes this year, which has been breaking a lot of stuff. So there might be occasionally something wrong with VLab, in which case I'll fix it pretty quickly. But if you notice, the course website sometimes randomly didn't work and a few other things. But we'll figure it out. I would just recommend doing it locally. And I'm not a big local person. I don't like when we do courses locally because everyone's computers do weird things and it's hard to figure out, but I think this is one of the exceptions where it's just really easy to do things locally on your computer. If you haven't already seen, besides the kind of course website and the forum, the other place you're going to spend a lot of time is Gitlab. Oh no. Darn it. Oh, that's not good. No, this is just kind of, how do I turn this off? There. I'm trying to be more security conscious these days. And I know that the problem with time-based passwords is that one of you could right now be sitting there and you know my password and I have like 10 seconds with this 6-digit code and you enter it too. And I have a high degree of power on Gitlab. No power is good. People are always like, I want power at work. And I'm like, no one wants power. Power is liability. Power is you get hacked and someone's like, was that you? Seriously, anyone who's like, I want more admin privileges is like a psychopath if they don't need it. So that's a bit mean. I'm joking, obviously. So GitLab is, GitLab's your fun site where everything is, and undergrads, you'll be very familiar with this. Postgrads, maybe less so. We went and deployed. Is Carol here tonight? Carol's it? Yeah? Is it Carol? Coral. That's yes, good fun. I like South Africa. I'm sorry. I spent like 3 weeks there in 2016. It was like the best time of my life. So since then, I'm just like over the moon. So this is like your assignment, and basically everything you do is on GitLab. It's a really easy course because there's just like assignment. There's only like 3 repos you have to deal with on GitLab. Again, postgrads, if you haven't had much experience with this, go do that intro lab. It is also linked on, I think it's linked somewhere. Git, I can't remember where it's linked. Resources, Git. There's some videos and stuff. It's around. It's linked in the notices and stuff on Ed. It's around. But GitLab, the website, is where we'll be doing all of the coursework. I'm not going to go through it because most of you should be familiar with it, and we'll have a look at assignment 1 together. I know some of you are probably edging for a break, but I don't think we're going to have more than like another 15 minutes to chat, and I figured you'd rather just get through it and go home. Yeah? Yeah, great. So we'll see a lot of GitLab, a lot of Eccles, a lot of Ed, a lot of GitLab. Resources, use the internet. There's so much stuff on the internet. We're not going to sit here and like spend 50 hours producing some educational video that's like 3 times worse than something you can find on YouTube, right? So we do provide a lot. We provide a lot of activities, a lot of like tutors going through stuff, but we're not here to answer every single question. But again, most of you are pretty independent by this stage, and you know that you can try and solve some of your own problems. And if you can't, we will help you too. Style is another question I get a lot. What style do we have in the course? What style guide are we following? The answer is that we don't really have one, because there's so many other things to worry about. There's so many things to learn in this course. We don't want to make you sit around questioning whether braces need to go on this line or the other line. However, we know that there's a handful of students here as well who just really like it because it calms you the hell down. I've learned this. Because if you don't have it, you'll sit there, again, having an existential crisis in bed, being like, am I doing it wrong? So there are kind of these stock standard style guides we have on the resources page. Somewhere, style, not there. I don't know where it is. For React. We don't really have like a style guide for like HTML, CSS and stuff, because honestly it's pretty straightforward. Like, as you'll see in the lectures and whatnot, it's all just very standard. But for React, which is a bit more complicated, there are some style guides that we've shared there. Airbnb's is really quite aggressive in terms of how strict it is, but you don't need to worry about that till later. There is a feedback form on Eccles that you can always leave feedback. If you click on that, it opens up a new link and you can just go and leave feedback at any point in the course. I'd prefer you email me. I really like it when people leave feedback and they tell me who they are, because then I can chat to you. Because what happens is sometimes people leave anonymous feedback and they say things like, the assignment's too hard. And I'm like, I don't know what you want me to do with that. Like, even if you were right, I'd like, so don't leave stupid feedback, because otherwise I have to delete it and I don't want to. So either leave your name optionally, or you can just email me, because I love to chat. I don't really care. I'm not like emotionally invested. This isn't like my whole identity, this course. I don't wake up every morning being like, I lecture 6080. I have other things I do with my day too, so I won't take any of it personally. Please be nice to each other too. I know this goes without saying, but once a year, some student says or does something stupid to another student or a tutor or something else, and don't do that. That's all very straightforward. Now, what we would normally do right here is that we would kind of do a little bit of a demo of kind of HTML and CSS and JavaScript just for a few minutes, just to give you a sense of it. Like literally not to teach you anything, but just to kind of like to show it to you if you haven't seen it. So you're like, oh, I can see that even though I have no idea what's happening. And we also kind of will briefly talk about assignment 1. So I have some stuff up here. Yep. And this is over here, it's very simple. This is a web page. And you can see in the URL, I'm actually loading a file on my computer, or client side. And on my left here is that file, and if I write hi, and I refresh the page, there's hi there. Right? Now, again, quick 5-minute hyper demo of this. We talk a lot about HTML. HTML, you probably have all seen it, right? Around. Who's seen a bold tag before? Right? Who's never seen that tag before? Cool. I like that. It means you were probably doing something more interesting. So, a fairly straightforward idea of a website. Okay, there's my code. It's running on a computer. There's no server here. The browser is the compiler. And I can actually go and have a look at, there's the code that the browser's running. Think of it like compiling. It's compiling that code, and it's spitting out or rendering this, which is hi being bold. And I can also make that hi italics if I'd like to. Okay, and now I can go and create some kind of like unordered list of items. So maybe I have a list of things I want to buy to make dinner tonight, which let's say it's like cheese. And then I'm going to make another one, which is like pasta. What else? One more ingredient. Tomato sauce. Good. And now I have like a list here. UL stands for unordered list, LI stands for list item. And I'm kind of building out the structures in that like 1990 style website. And I can make a link to, for instance, I want to make a link to Google. Like this, I can just link to Google. And now when I click that link, it'll take me to Google. So this is HTML. That's what that is. There's a lecture on that, goes for like 45 minutes. You'll go into more depth with it. CSS is where we layer on top of that and we start deciding much more detail about how things look and feel. So for instance here, I've got this Google here, but I can actually go and create some CSS in a little bubble down here. And I can specify a particular name, a bit like a variable, and that variable has properties, or an object that has properties. And that might be something like, I can give it any name I want, like mouse. And then I can start actually saying that anything that is of type mouse is going to have these properties. And now everything between these two style tags you see here is basically, I did unvanish that, right? Oh, good. Got really worried that everyone was still looking at a blank screen. Everything kind of between those two style tags is CSS, and everything else is HTML. So I can go and do some things like, I'm going to say the font size is 20 points, which is really big. And then I'm going to say that, I actually would like it to be Arial instead of Times New Roman. Change the font there. I'd really like it to have more space around it. I want it to have like 20 pixels of space everywhere so that it can, breathe a little bit. Like that. And I'd really like it to also have a border. My border width, I want it to have a 1 pixel border. I have to usually give it like is it border style? I normally don't do it like this. Solid, and then like border color might be like black. There's a border, right? So CSS, you can kind of feel it's how we're starting to really like fine tune and paint that structure that we've created. And then JavaScript is kind of another layer on top of that, which is where things get a little bit harder. But JavaScript on a web page is basically just some like more dynamic code that can do something interesting. Where I'll show you an example. Let's say I give this particular link, an ID called Google. I can call it anything I want, or like Google link. What I can do with JavaScript is, and it's a bit more like a programming language, and none of this will make sense, but in this particular case, I can actually say that when the page loads, I would like to go and grab an element called Google link, right? And I would like to say that, I'm going to listen when someone clicks that link, and when they click that link, I'm going to call a function. And the function I'm going to call is simply going to create an alert on the screen that says you clicked the link. So when I click that, it gives me a little pop-up there, right? So that's like JavaScript. It's starting to be like a bit more dynamic. Or I can do some other interesting things, like for instance, instead of that link going to Google, I could make it go somewhere else, and like so on and so forth. We can create buttons, or for instance, let me get rid of that Google link. and I'll just create a button on the page. So think about this, right? I've got some HTML that's a button, because it's got all those little taggy things. I might style it. I might give it a particular style. I'll call it like click me. And again, I could say, click me is going to be like color blue. So now it's a blue button. I could give it a particular ID that's called like, click me button. And similar to what I did before down here, I could just change this around and say when someone actually, go get me the element click me button, listen for someone to click on it. When they click on it, do a thing, but that thing I'm going to do here in this case is actually go and say, let's hide the list. So I've got this list up here of items, and I might call that, say, ingredients, and give it some like unique identifier. And then I'll say, well, you know what? When someone calls my function, which happens when I click on the button, what I'm going to do is actually hide my list. Like that. And the list is gone. Cool. Wow. Oh my God, we did stuff. So that is like the next 5 weeks of your life. But like substantially less weird. And much more meaningful. And the reason I like to talk about this a bit is there's all these like lectures you're going to have to watch anyway, so it'll be really fun to go through stuff tonight, but it's like you're going to have to watch them and there's been more thought put into those. But what you just saw is like a microcosm of everything coming up. It's like, okay, HTML, the funny tag things, it's all quite structural. CSS is this slightly different looking language. It's all about how stuff looks in a very finicky way. And then JavaScript is this very odd looking language which lets me listen to events and create actions and stuff like that. So that's everything we're doing. Are there any questions about that? Yeah, you ready to go home? Yeah. Cool. Okay, so last thing, tonight, just before the lecture, I released assignment 1. Okay? Now, assignment 1 is a very straightforward assignment that I can't remember what it's worth. It's probably in the course outline. 15%. Great. I don't know who said that, I'm sorry. It's 15%, it's not much. There's essentially 4 questions. Now, if I start from the end, the 4th question is actually a JavaScript question, which we put in there. You kind of can't do this one until the end of next week in a way. Like you kind of can't do it for a couple weeks, which might annoy you, but the reason it's here is to kind of just encourage you to start it, to start learning JavaScript. Because the problem is if we don't kind of push you along a little bit, we release assignment 2, and then you're really busy dealing with all your problems in life, and then you get to Flex Week and you've kind of procrastinated. And then you got to learn weeks of stuff in like a week, and you're just going to cry. So it's like, we don't want you to cry. So the 4th part here is actually just asking you to make a little form that does stuff, like you enter inputs, that like you click on things, very much like what I just described there, just more drawn out. But the first 3 tasks, which is where most of the work is here, and students usually tell me that this is like the easiest part of the assignment, right? They're like, oh, that was the fun part at the end. But the first 3 questions are actually asking you to say, and you can go read this in your own time, but basically we're giving you an image like this, right? These are random pages taken from the internet where we go and randomize the text on them. And we tell you how big this particular kind of web page should be, like in this case 1220 by 664. And we ask you to make a page with just HTML and CSS that looks like that. So basically like replicate it, like construct it, just from this flat image. We give you these 3 like photos in it, but we expect you to put 3 boxes there, and then in each box like put an image in each box, and then put like this title here that's centered and has this color and is a little bit bigger, like that, So it's essentially an assignment that's asking you to sit down and spend the time getting comfortable with how to express yourself through CSS to make something look how you want it to look, which is how we want you to want it to look, right? And there are 3 images that we essentially ask you to create web pages for. And the first one is here. The second one and the second question is this one. Slightly different challenges here. The kind of challenges are mostly just around, there's a few interesting things, like there's a little border here and there's a couple of icons and you see the text is kind of jaggedy there. So again, I'm not going to elaborate much on this now, because if I was to kind of point you more specifically as to what to do, if you haven't watched any lectures yet, like most of you probably haven't even realized your holidays are over, right? So This one is just like a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more interesting. And the first two are completely static, fixed size pages. They just look, they're exactly that size. We tell you exactly what size to make them. And the third one is another simple page. To be honest, this is actually the easiest first assignment I probably put together because I'm feeling a bit tired. I think winter's made me a bit cold, drizzly. So I was like, I'm sure you're all feeling the same. So we'll make it a little bit easier. You know, a few images, a few boxes, some text, except this one's interesting because we want you to make it mobile responsive, this one. As in like, okay, this page might look like this on your computer, but when you make your browser much smaller, maybe the size of a mobile, we expect it to kind of look like this, where everything kind of stacks up against each other. You know, so that's it. It's basically like another simple page, but there's like the mobile version of it too. And there's all the pre-recorded lectures that talk about dealing with this kind of stuff. But that's essentially the assignment. And each of the questions, if you go inside the folders, like for instance, task 1, you'll be able to see the actual image we're asking you to replicate. And if the image has stuff, we give you like the, you know, the underlying components to work with. You know, so like all the info's there. None of the images have a crazy amount of text, so you will just have to type the text out. I'm sure you can type 50 words. I believe in you. It's not going to be too bad. And most of them don't have a ton of text anyway. But that's the crux of it. It's meant to be just a chance for you to. And someone's posted in the chat. They said can't see assignment 1 on GitLab. Error 404 while redirecting. It depends where you should be able to find it tonight. You can actually click this link right now. It says not released, but it is released. But if you just click that button on Eccles, it'll take you to your repo. If you can't see it when you click on that, there's a problem specific to you and you can just post on the forum. But that's how you get to it. You follow that link and it takes you to your particular instance of that repo. The only kind of notes about this assignment are that if you go kind of down the bottom, in the analyzing the pages, we basically say that the two things that are most critical to understand of the image is typically what color is that and how big is that? You know, like when you look at those images, they're the two questions you're going to have. There are so many tools, you know, there's like hardcore tools like Photoshop, but there's a bunch of web-based tools where you can just upload an image or like you can just have an add-on and look at it. So there's lots of stuff that will help you just check what a color is. There's websites like this where you can just check how big something is. So don't feel kind of destroyed there. We ask you to do everything in this course on Google Chrome. It's a nice thing for Windows and Mac and OS X and everything. It's just nice and standard. It's extremely popular, and that way you don't run into any weird issues with you know, compatibility or anything. You don't really have to check your stuff works on the CSE machines. I've been relaxing that a bit. You can kind of just, you know, check on Chrome on your own computer. Chrome is pretty stable cross-platform these days, like most browsers are, so don't need to worry about that. In the first assignment, we don't let you use any external libraries. If you don't know what that means, then it probably doesn't concern you, but there are some smarter cookies who join this course who are like, oh, can I use Bootstrap or some other kind of off-the-shelf library to do components? And it's like, no, no, you can't. And then we have the marking criteria. It's actually really simple. Half the marks we give you are for how much, we call it visual compliance, but it's essentially like, does what you produced match what we asked you to make? And if it looks the same, we give you the marks. Right? Tutors are generally just going to give you the marks and look for problems, right? And there's always that question of like, oh, well, is this good enough? Is this close enough? The short answer with this assignment is that if things are a couple of pixels off, no one's going to care. We're not trying to like be mean. Generally, tutors are trying to mark this quickly because they have complex lives too, and they got their own problems. So, you know, they're going to be looking at it and being like, yep, that looks like that image. I'm going to move on. They're not going to be sitting there with like a ruler or anything. And like, if you don't have to get the exact color right. Like, you know, it's not nitpicky. It's a very human experience, but they will still look at it and be like, does it look the same? And you can actually kind of see this when you go through some of the tute questions and stuff. There'll be like an image that looks a certain way, and you can load up the tute solution, and you'll see that it looks really close, maybe a couple of slight discrepancies. Generally, text is one of the hardest things to get looking right, is all I'd say. Like your font and your text will look a bit weird sometimes, but that's okay. The other half of the marks comes from code quality. It's it's one of the only times in your class, in your course, I guess, that we really look at your code quality. So half of it will be your tutor actually marking things. And a lot of like what's good HTML and CSS is described in the pre-recorded lectures. You know, so you can just go and watch those lectures and you'll kind of get a sense of what we mean by good code quality. Don't cheat. We will generally find you. And if we don't find you, you will regret it one day when you realize you're not very smart. So why are you paying $1,000 to get not smart, you know? Assignments due Monday of week 4. It'll be due at 10 p.m. I'm going to go and update that. I'm feeling like might as well make it due at 10 p.m. Right? No one wants to be up on a Sunday night thinking, I really got to get this done before I go to sleep. And then when you do get it done, just run that on the terminal. I also have to update the late submission policy. Someone just reminded me that on the way here. And I was like, scat, I forgot we can't use that anymore because that's the one I use. That's the late policy I usually use, but we will have to change that. Like normally it's due at 10 a.m. I'm going to make it due at 10 p.m. and have a hard cutoff. Okay? Someone's going to submit it late still. I don't know who you are, but there's always fun. Yep. Any questions about the assignment at a high level? We'll talk about it next week. We'll come back to it. Yep.
When is the assignment released?
Assignment 2?
And 3?
I'm probably just going to release them both on the weekend. Like they're kind of written. I just need to like sit down for an hour and make sure it's all good. You don't have to start them now or anything, but I'll release them. Might as well. Yep.
Can we resubmit over our previous submission?
Yeah, absolutely. Submit as many times as you like. We pretty much just take the latest thing at the due date. Yep. Yep.
Can we submit through web CMS or through the actual site, or do we have to go from a command prompt?
It's so basically what you have on like the latest commit you have on your master branch on Git. If you're not familiar with that or anyone isn't, like it'll make sense very quickly. But it's basically like whatever's on GitLab is what we take. The CS. Yeah. So this command actually takes what you have on GitLab and submits it. Like it's like you kind of just literally just like, you know, you can log into CSE and you can just like run the command and it will just take what's on GitLab and submit it for you. Yeah, cool. Easy. Any other questions here? Otherwise I'll answer a few YouTube questions before we wrap up.
Would all the codes, including CSS, put in the same file?
Is all the code that we write that's CSS, should we put it in the same file?
Yeah, because they show that CSS put in the HTML file. So
Oh, sure. No, like typically in this course we'll get you to put them in separate files. Yeah. And we'll go into much more depth in those pre-recorded lectures for sure. It's a good question to ask, but no, this is a bit of a crappy like quick demo. So cool. So a few questions. People saying I can't see assignment 1 on GitLab and so forth. Any issues? Just post on the forum. Like, you know, I'm not going to go send out a series of emails to everyone about it. Like, if there are small issues, we'll just fix them up. Don't need to worry at all. I think you're timetabled on this course for Wednesday as well. Thursday or something? Thursday? Yeah, I asked CSE for like, I told the uni that I wanted 4 hours of 1531 lectures and 2 hours of 6080 lectures, and they like gave me the other. It was a big timetabling mess in 1531. So we won't use that Thursday slot unless, I don't know, my house catches on fire on a Monday night and I need to move it. But I can't imagine why we would. But maybe. But no, we have nothing planned on Thursday. And as a general rule, you can just rely pretty cleanly on what's just on this timetable. And if anything was to change, I would email you and update you and stuff, so you can just check that out there. But I think that's it. There wasn't many questions on the chat that weren't just about I have a specific problem. Cool. Anything else? Who's hungry? Yeah? Dinner time? All right, well, thank you for coming. I know we're not going to have a lot of in-person lectures. We will see how you feel, right? We'll maybe, you know, summer warms up, you're getting a bit cooped up at home. Maybe we'll do something in week 7. We'll play it by ear. So I won't see you for a little while. I probably will find a way to see you before the end of term. But have a good evening. Yeah? Look after yourselves and enjoy the warm experience back into university again. So, and thank you to those who tuned in online as well. It's nice to see you.